Hey everybody, I'm out here with the Kelty Rumpus 4 today, and I gotta be honest, I really wanted to like this tent. In fact, when I first got this tent, I thought, man, with the features this tent has and for the low price that it comes for, this could be a home run for Kelty. But then as I started testing and using this tent, I really found that there was one main thing that is holding this tent back. And so we're gonna get into that in this video, but first I'm gonna walk through what exactly you get inside this bag when you buy the tent. We'll run through the setup process real quick. I'll take you on a full tour of the tent and all the different things you get when it's set up. I'll also run through the main pros and cons of this tent, and then finally at the end of the video, I'm gonna talk about who should actually buy this tent and who should think about getting something else. And in that part of the video, I'll also talk a little bit about how this tent compares to the Kelty Rumpus 6. And so if you're shopping for that tent, then stick around to the end of the video, and I think you'll find some interesting tidbits in that portion of the video as well. So let's get started. Okay, this is what you get in the bag. First of all, you get these nice orange stakes. You get 17 of these, and they are pretty nice in my experience, but something funny about that it says no-bendium, Kelty no-bendium. I guess that's what they call the material that this is made out of. And as you can see, I tested it, and that is not quite the case. This is a little unfair. I was trying to drive these into some like brick or rock or something like that. But yeah, generally they are pretty good stakes if you're not trying to do something dumb like that. So that's the stakes. And then here they have the poles. The poles are made out of fiberglass, and there are two different diameters. This one is for the vestibule, and it is 11 millimeters, whereas the poles that come with the canopy are both 9 millimeters, which is interesting because the canopy poles are narrower actually than the vestibule ones. So that's interesting and worth noting. Here we have the main body of the tent and the rainfly. The rainfly is the blue bit there. We'll look at that stuff more later, but let's quickly look here at the stuff sack. I actually think Kelty stuff sacks are quite nice. They have what they call a shark mouth opening, which is this extra material that's kind of on the corners when you pack it up, and that does make it quite a bit easier to get the tent in and out of the bag. This also comes with instructions if you're the type of person that likes to have that. I read through them. They actually are pretty helpful. And then the last thing that you get here is it just has a couple strips of material, which is what they use to tie up the full bundle in the factory before shipping it in the bag. So that's what you get. Now let's talk about the setup of the Kelty Rumpus 4. There are a few interesting and unique things about the setup process, so let's go through all of it. First, you want to just lay out the canopy, of course, and then assemble the poles. Once you get the poles assembled, they go into these little sleeves in the corners, which is fairly unique. A lot of other tents use pins or something of that nature, so that's pretty cool on this tent. And then you get these clips that put up the canopy, and then you put the rainfly up over the top. Don't forget to do those little Velcro straps on the inside of the rainfly that attach to the poles. There's two of them, one towards the peak of the tent and one under that little guy line point. And then you got to clip in the corners of the rainfly before you put in the pole that goes for the vestibule. And I found it easiest to kind of expose the pole and then pull the rest of the vestibule over the top like so. Then you just got to stake everything out in the corners. And once you get the corners of the tent staked out, you can do the vestibule, of course, and then all of the guy lines, or as many as you feel you need. I'm going to do them all here just for illustration purposes. And then once you get that all done, then you've got the Kelty Rumpus 4 pretty much set up. All right, here we are. Let's take a tour of the Kelty Rumpus 4. And there's two main things to tour here. First is the inside body of the tent, and then there's this really cool vestibule space. So let's start inside the body of the tent, and then we'll come out here and talk more about the vestibule. And if you look at the inside of the tent, let's first look at the storage. There are 4 storage pockets, one in basically each corner. And then if you look at the top of the tent, there's also a lashing loop in each of the 4 corners, and also one at the peak of the tent. So if you want to hang some lanterns up there, or with the 4 corners, if you wanted to hang a shelf, you could do that. This doesn't come with a shelf, but if you had an extra one, you could do that. Now looking at the capacity, if you really pack this to its maximum capacity, you could get 5 people in there. But probably you're not going to want to do that. So if you want to fit people comfortably or with a bit of gear, then you're looking at something closer to 2 or 3 people. And so yeah, here's what it looks like if we throw in a backpack, and then grab another backpack and we'll throw that in. So if you have 2 or 3 people in there, you can also fit some gear, and I think it would be pretty comfortable for that number of people. And if you look at the peak height of this tent, that's also worth knowing. It is 58 inches according to my measurement, and that's actually the same as the manufacturer's measurement as well, which is not always the case. But with that, most people are probably not going to be able to stand up fully in this. I'm about 5'10", and I definitely can't stand up straight inside the tent, but that's okay. And hey, this is the part of the show where you hit the like button. Trust me, it'll make you feel better. All right, now let's talk about the pros and the cons of this tent. I have 3 main pros to highlight and 2 cons, and we'll start with the pros because I try to be a positive guy. Pro number 1 of this tent is it actually does pretty well when it comes to wind resistance. In fact, you might have noticed that it's a pretty windy day out today, but this tent is holding up fairly well to that wind, and there's a few reasons for that. Number one, it's just a fairly small dome-style tent, and that is a geometry that tends to do fairly well in the wind. But another big reason that this tent does well is because there are a lot of stake down and guy out points for this tent. In fact, if you go around this tent, you'll notice that there are about 9 guy out points, in fact exactly 9 guy out points, and that's not even counting the main corners and the vestibule stakes that go in this tent. So if you add up all of the different places where this tent can be staked in, it adds up to 15 different stakes, which is a lot, especially for a small tent like this one. So overall, this tent tends to do pretty well in the wind, at least according to my testing here, and so that's the first pro. Pro number 2 of this tent is the ease of setup and the takedown and packing away of this tent. So it is a fairly small dome-style tent, and it's got a pretty simple geometry, which makes it pretty easy to set this thing up, but Kelty makes it even easier because they have these sleeves in the corners instead of pins or clips or something of that nature, which I think does make it easier to get the structure of the tent assembled at the beginning, especially if you're doing this with one person like I am. Another thing that's worth mentioning with this tent is that it has clips all the way up the canopy, and it doesn't have sleeves at the top, because sleeves is one thing, especially if you put together a lot of different types of tents, you'll notice this, that sleeves are one thing that can make it really frustrating to get that first step of the tent assembly, putting together the main structure, more difficult, because those sleeves can get snagged and it can just be hard to get the pull fully through the sleeve and out the other side. And so having just clips for the canopy does make this easier to set up, I think. In addition, when it comes to packing this tent away when you're ready to leave your campsite, I think the stuff sack that Kelty provides is really nice because they put a bit of extra room in there, and it has what they call a shark mouth bag, and so there's a bit of extra space in the corners, which makes it way easier to get this tent packed away, which is a big deal, especially if you've ever had a situation where you're ready to leave your campsite, especially if you're on a timeline or trying to get out of there fast, and you can't get the tent back in the bag no matter how many times you fold it and roll it up. And this is an experience I've actually had with some other types of tents. In fact, I've had this with Coleman tents a couple of times. Their bags tend to be pretty difficult to get the tent back into. And so for the Kelty, I think another pro is just the ease of setup and packing away for the tent. But by far the biggest pro of this Kelty Rumpus 4 tent, in my opinion, is this awesome vestibule space that it provides. And so if you've seen my videos in the past, you'll know that I really love a good vestibule. And this one is really good, I think. It extends pretty far away from the main canopy of the tent, which means you have a decent amount of space, and it does have this extra cross pull that it provides for the vestibule, giving it an even farther extension. And so you can actually fit 2 full-size or standard camping chairs, whatever you call them here, inside of the tent, and you have enough room to do that even if the vestibule is fully zipped down. So if it's a rainy day and you need to just hang out inside, read a book or do something like that, or just chat with whoever else you're camping with, then you can put those 2 standard size camping chairs in here, zip it down, and you're good to go. You can also roll this up and sort of latch it at the top by the pole, and then you can get a little bit of extra shade when you're sitting in your chairs under the vestibule, or you can just open this up because it provides a pretty decent amount of ventilation space, especially if this vestibule area is facing the direction of the wind. It provides some extra ventilation, which is, again, is nice for this tent. 100% the worst thing about this Kelty Rumpus tent, and the thing that makes me so sad because I wanted to like it so much, is the waterproofing, unfortunately, for this tent. It did leak during my testing after only about 2 hours of light to moderate rain, and I know where it leaked from, actually. You can see at the top of the tent here, there's a little air vent. And that air vent seems to be the source of where it leaked during my testing. And I looked pretty closely at it, and I couldn't figure out exactly which part of this was causing the leak, but it was sort of directly above the point of leaking. And so it seems pretty clear that that is where it came from. And so that's obviously not good. If you look around the rest of the tent though, it doesn't really seem to have too many other vulnerabilities to waterproofing. The seam taping on the rainfly seems to be pretty good. It is a full coverage rainfly, and so you get pretty good amount of protection overall for this canopy area of the tent. And so unfortunately, there just seems to be this glaring weakness, is this leak point there at the vent. Now I should mention that I took a look at the 6-person size of the Kelty Rumpus, and it looks like the vent on that tent is actually designed differently. And so if you end up buying the 6-person size of the Kelty Rumpus, I haven't tested this, but you might actually not have this problem at all. And if that was the case, then I think the Kelty Rumpus 6 would probably actually be a really great tent. While we're talking about the Kelty Rumpus 6, let me also mention that that tent also has a stand height that's a bit above 6 feet, so you could actually stand up in that tent, and it has 2 doors, not just this front door, it also has I think a smaller back door on the back end, at least according to my online research. And so I think the Kelty Rumpus 6 looks to be a little bit better in some aspects than this Kelty Rumpus 4, but it might also have other weaknesses. I haven't tested it, but sometimes with larger tents, you also get more weaknesses when it comes to windproofing and things of that nature. But let's get back to the cons, because I did want to highlight a second con, which I think is not as big of a deal as the leak, but is still important if you're shopping for a great tent for you to use. So there are a couple of things related to build quality that I wanted to highlight. So first of all is the material that the tent is made out of, and also the material that the poles are made out of. Let's start with the poles. So the poles are made out of fiberglass. And even though fiberglass is pretty frequent with tents in the budget range, if you go to more premium tents, then they do switch over to aluminum, because aluminum poles tend to be stronger and just better overall. And so if you want something that is sort of a luxury or a high build quality tent, then look for something that has aluminum poles, and this tent doesn't. And so if you're shopping for a 4-person size tent, then you could look at something like the Mountain Smith Bear Creek 4-person tent, or the Stoic Madrone 4, which are tents that I've just recently tested as well. I also mentioned the materials, and the materials of this tent are made out of a 68D or denier polyester material for both the floor and the sections of the canopy. And so that is pretty standard in the budget range, and it is okay, but if you want something that has higher build quality, then you would go for something that has 75 denier polyester material, and that would be something like the Stoic Madrone 4, which I mentioned earlier. That has 75D material both for the body of the tent and the floor. However, if you go even up higher in more like premium luxury tents, then what you'll often get is a 75D material for both the canopy and the rainfly, whereas for the floor you would get a much higher 150D polyester material, which just makes the tent more durable on the floor, which is obviously a good thing. All right, now who should actually buy the Kelty Rumpus 4? Unfortunately, due to the leak, I probably wouldn't recommend this to most campers who are shopping for a tent like this in the 4-person or budget range of tents. However, if you are somebody who really likes the vestibule and design of this tent, and you're really into it overall, except for that pesky leak on the top of the tent, and you also happen to be somebody who is handy, you're handy and you can repair things, or maybe you are familiar with how to do seam sealing pretty well, then you might consider doing this tent, and if you end up having leaks, just making some repairs yourself. However, this is not the tent that I would recommend for most people shopping in the budget range. That would actually be a different tent, and you can see the head-to-head comparison of 7 different tents that I tested to find the best one in a video I'm going to put up here on the screen. So I highly suggest that you go and check that out. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye now.